Deep in the heart of Norway, beyond the icy fjords and the rolling green valleys, lies a forest unlike any other. Known to the locals as Skog, the Whispering Forest, it has long been a place of fear, mystery, and unexplained disappearances. The legend dates back centuries, passed down in hushed voices by generations of villagers. The story goes that those who enter the forest alone at dusk may hear soft whispers calling their name. The voices are said to be familiar, sometimes a loved one, sometimes even their own, but those who answer the whispers never return. This isn't just folklore. Over the last 100 years, dozens of people have vanished within the forest, leaving behind no trace. Authorities have searched, helicopters have flown overhead, yet no bodies, no footprints, and no signs of struggle have ever been found. Among the many eerie stories, one stands out: the case of Elin Vik, a 24-year-old journalist who went missing in 1973 while investigating the legend. Her last known communication was a tape recording found in her abandoned car near the forest's edge. The recording, later analyzed by police, contained Ellen's voice. "The forest is quiet, too quiet, but I swear I hear something. It sounds like my mother's voice, but she's been dead for years. I know I shouldn't listen, but..." The tape ends in static. Her body was never found. Another case from 2009 involves 6 university students who entered the forest as part of a research project on Norwegian folklore. Only one returned, Jonas Helgeland, found wandering in a daze near the village border. His clothes were torn, his skin scratched, and his expression one of pure terror. Jonas refused to speak of what happened. The only words he ever muttered were, "It knew my name. It whispered to me." The other 5 students were never seen again. Norway has a long history of myths surrounding spirits in the woods, rooted in Norse folklore. The Huldra, a forest spirit said to lure men with her beauty, was once thought to dwell in the deepest parts of the wilderness. But the Whispering Forest legend is different. It is not one entity. It is the forest itself that speaks, and those who listen are forever lost. Local elders say the forest was once cursed after a village massacre in the 1600s. During a brutal winter, a group of outlaws attacked a nearby settlement, slaughtering entire families before escaping into the woods. A storm swept through that night, and by morning the outlaws were gone. Never found, never seen again. The whispers, they say, began soon after. For the sake of protecting the village and the remaining survivors, we will alter some names and locations in this story. However, the events that unfold are inspired by the chilling reality of the Whispering Forest. This is where my story begins. A journalist's journey into the heart of the unknown, a search for the truth, a battle against something that should not exist. My name is Elias Hagen, and I never believed in ghosts, myths, or supernatural forces. At least not until I returned to the village of Norddal, deep in the heart of Norway. I had spent years as an investigative journalist, uncovering political scandals and exposing corruption. But after a controversial case forced me to take a leave of absence, I found myself with nowhere to go. That's when I got the call. My grandmother had passed away. She was the last of my family in Norddal, the only connection I had left to the village where my ancestors had lived for centuries. Her death meant the house she lived in, the same house my great-grandfather built, now belonged to me. At first, I saw it as a chance to escape, a quiet place to clear my mind, to plan my next steps. But Norddal wasn't just a peaceful village lost in time. It held secrets, shadows from the past that refused to fade, and at the center of it all was the Whispering Forest. The moment I arrived, I felt something was off. The air was colder than I remembered, the village quieter. The people I had known as a child avoided my gaze, whispering behind closed doors. I should have realized then that I was stepping into something much darker than I had anticipated. The house was exactly as I remembered. Wooden walls, a stone fireplace, shelves filled with books older than me. But one thing stood out: a locked box on the kitchen table. A note rested beside it, written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. "Elias, do not go into the forest. The voices lie." I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Inside the box, I found a collection of letters, all dated decades before I was born. They weren't from family or friends. They were warnings, pleas from villagers desperate to keep my grandmother away from something. The voices call to us, Marta. You must never listen. Your father saw them once. He never returned the same. The forest knows your name now. It will not let you go. I didn't understand what it meant. Not yet. Being a journalist meant I couldn't ignore something like this. The story begged to be told, but the villagers weren't eager to talk. I visited the local pub, the only place where people gathered after dark. The moment I mentioned the whispering forest, conversations stopped. Eyes darted away. Even the bartender, a man who had known my family for years, refused to meet my gaze. Only one person was willing to speak to me, the village historian. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed and stern. When I asked about the forest, she sighed heavily and motioned for me to follow her to her office, a small room filled with books, maps, and records of the missing. You don't want to dig into this, Elias, she warned. People who go looking for answers in the forest, they don't come back. She pulled out a photograph, a grainy black and white image of a group of young men standing at the forest's edge. This was taken in 1965. Every one of them disappeared within the week. I stared at the image, my pulse quickening. One of the men looked familiar, too familiar. It was my grandfather. My grandfather had died before I was born. I had never known much about him, only that he had disappeared when my mother was still a child. My grandmother never spoke of him, and my mother never asked. But now I had proof that he had gone into the whispering forest. Astrid hesitated before handing me another piece of paper, a journal entry, written in my grandfather's handwriting. I hear them. They know me. They know my name. The whispers, they sound like my father. I felt my blood turn cold. The legend wasn't just a myth. It was personal. That night, I lay in bed, unable to sleep. The house creaked with age, the wind howling outside. But beneath the wind, I heard something else, a whisper. It was faint, almost like a breath against my ear. My eyes darted toward the window, but there was nothing there, only the trees swaying in the distance. Then I heard it again. A voice. My mother's voice. Elias, come outside. My chest tightened. My mother had died years ago. This wasn't real. I squeezed my eyes shut, covering my ears, but the whispers only grew louder. They knew my name, and they were waiting. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, that the exhaustion of traveling, the emotional weight of my grandmother's death, and the eerie village atmosphere were all playing tricks on my mind. But deep down, I knew better. The whispers had begun, and once they started, they never truly stopped. The next morning, I woke to a heavy mist rolling through the village, clinging to the cobbled streets like a ghostly veil. My first stop was Astrid Eriksson's office. She had already given me the first clue, my grandfather's journal entry, but I needed more. Elias, there's something you should know, she said, flipping through a dusty old record book. The forest isn't just legend. People have gone missing for centuries. But there's something else, something the village won't talk about. She slid a document across the table. It was an old police report, yellowed with age. Ilin Vik, I read aloud. A journalist missing since 1973. Astrid nodded grimly. She was investigating the whispers, just like you are now. She disappeared without a trace. The only thing they ever found was her tape recorder, still running. I swallowed hard. This was becoming too real. Despite the overwhelming history of disappearances, my logical mind refused to fully accept that something supernatural was at play. There had to be an explanation. Some kind of environmental phenomenon? A trick of acoustics in the trees? Determined to find answers, I ventured into the whispering forest that evening, not too deep, just along the outer edge. The moment I stepped in, the temperature dropped noticeably, the air thick with silence. Then the first whisper came, a soft breath against my ear. Elias. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my grip. No one was there. I stepped backward, trying to slow my breathing. It was just the wind, just my mind playing tricks. Then I heard it again. Closer. Elias, come closer. A voice I hadn't heard in years. My mother's voice. My heart pounded. I knew it wasn't real. My mother was gone. But the temptation to listen, to answer, was overwhelming. I ran. I barely slept that night. My dreams were filled with echoes, whispers in the dark, and the sensation of something standing just outside my window. When morning came, I had made my decision. I wasn't leaving, not yet. I needed to know the truth. The whispers had found me. Even in daylight, I felt their presence lingering. I couldn't escape the feeling that the forest was waiting, watching. And the more I dug into its past, the more the voices seemed to tighten their grip. It started small. The lights flickered in my grandmother's house, even though the wiring had been replaced just last year. Cold spots appeared in rooms with no windows, and objects seemed to shift places when I wasn't looking. But then, the scratches started. One morning I woke to deep, jagged marks across my bedroom door, long, thin, like claw marks. The same night, I heard footsteps pacing outside my window. But when I looked, the yard was empty, or so I thought. For a fraction of a second, I caught a glimpse of something, a dark shape in the trees, standing motionless, watching. I knew I couldn't face this alone. I turned to Astrid once more, hoping she could help make sense of the whispers. "You shouldn't have gone into the forest," she whispered. "It knows you now." She showed me an old woodcut engraving from the 1800s, a depiction of a man standing in the forest surrounded by shadows, his face twisted in terror. "The legend says the whispers are the voices of the lost," Astrid explained, "and once you hear them, they never leave you." I gripped the paper tightly, my pulse racing. If this was true, then I had already gone too far. The whispers knew my name. They wanted me to listen. That night, as I tried to sleep, I heard it again. A voice. Closer than ever. Elias opened the door. It was my mother's voice. But my mother was dead. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then a knock, slow, deliberate. I grabbed the handle of the door, my heart hammering. But before I could react, the door creaked open on its own. The whispers poured in. And I realized too late I had already let them inside. The whispers had invaded my mind. They were no longer distant echoes in the wind. They were inside my house, inside my thoughts, pulling me toward the forest. I couldn't fight it forever. I knew the forest held the answers. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before it consumed me. Astrid handed me a weathered notebook, its pages filled with the scribbled accounts of Ellen Vick, the journalist who vanished in 1973. Her notes were erratic, desperate. The forest is alive. The whispers are not spirits, they are something else. They know me, they call to me, and I fear if I listen too long, I will disappear like the rest. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. I saw them tonight, not people. They watch from the trees, waiting. If I don't leave soon, I will become one of them. My stomach twisted. What if Elin hadn't just disappeared? What if she had become one of them? Armed with a flashlight, a recording device, and a desperate need for answers, I returned to the whispering forest. The deeper I went, the stronger the whispers became. They were no longer gentle or pleading. They were commanding. "Elias, come closer. We see you." Then I saw it, a figure standing between the trees. My breath caught in my throat. It was my grandfather, but I knew it wasn't him. His eyes were hollow, his skin unnaturally dark, his mouth moving in silence as the whispers filled my head. I took a step back, but the ground beneath me gave way, and I was swallowed by the darkness. I awoke in a place that shouldn't exist. The forest was wrong. The trees bent at unnatural angles, the sky was an endless void, and the whispers were screaming. Then I saw them. Dozens of shadowy figures lurking in the mist, their bodies flickering between shapes, faces distorted in agony. They had all been people once, and they were waiting for me to join them. "Let go, Elias," the voices urged. "Become one of us." I fought to hold on to reality. My mind was slipping, memories unraveling. But then I heard something new, a voice that wasn't a whisper. It was Astrid. She was calling my name from somewhere beyond the void. I had a way out. Summoning every last ounce of willpower, I ran. I don't remember escaping the forest. I only remember waking up at the edge of the village, Astrid kneeling beside me, her face pale. "You almost didn't come back," she whispered. I looked at the forest, its shadows writhing in the distance. I had my answers, but the whispers were still there, waiting, and I knew they would never truly leave me. I should have left. Astrid begged me to. The villagers wouldn't look me in the eye anymore. Even in the daylight, I could feel the whispers at the edges of my mind, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. But I needed to end this. The forest wasn't done with me. I spent the next night listening to Ellen Viek's old recording. The last thing she had said before disappearing echoed in my mind. The deeper you go, the harder it is to leave. I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag, food, a knife, a flashlight, and the ritual notes Astrid had found in the village archives. According to old legends, there was a way to sever the forest's hold, a ritual that required a willing sacrifice. I had no intention of dying, but I needed to try. This time, I didn't just stand at the edges of the forest. I walked straight into its heart. The trees closed around me, the world behind me fading into shadow. The whispers were waiting. Elias, stay with us. It's time. I fought against their pull, reciting the ritual under my breath. The words burned my tongue, the air thickening around me. Then I saw them, the lost souls of the forest. They stood in a circle, staring at me, their mouths open but silent. Among them, I saw Ellen Viek, my grandfather, the missing students. Their eyes were hollow, their faces stretched in silent agony. I raised my knife. If the ritual worked, the forest's hold would weaken. The whispers would have to let them go. The shadows lunged at me. I drove the blade into the earth. A piercing screech filled the forest. The trees trembled, the whispers turned to screams of rage. I felt something pulling at my soul, trying to drag me into the void. Then, suddenly, silence. I opened my eyes. The shadows were gone. The lost souls had vanished. I staggered backward, my breath ragged. The forest was quiet. I had won, or so I thought. The morning after my final confrontation with the whispering forest, I woke in my grandmother's house, drenched in sweat. My hands were shaking, my mind foggy, but I was alive. Astrid was waiting for me in the kitchen, her face drawn and pale. She had known what I had attempted, and she had been afraid I wouldn't return. "You stopped the whispers," she murmured, "for now." The weight of her words settled in my chest like stone. I had broken the ritual, severed the connection between the forest and the lost souls, but I could still feel something lurking at the edges of my thoughts. It wasn't over. Norddal changed in the following days. The air was lighter, the villagers more open. For the first time in decades, no one heard the whispers at night. I saw children playing near the forest line, a place they had always been warned to avoid. Elderly men who once crossed themselves at the mere mention of the trees now spoke of the past without fear. But I wasn't convinced. I knew the forest had merely been silenced, not defeated, and deep down I knew it still remembered me. On my last night in Norddal, as I packed my bags to leave, I heard it. A whisper. Faint. Almost a sigh. "Elias." I froze. Slowly I turned toward the window. The forest stood quiet and unmoving, but the trees seemed closer than before. I backed away, my pulse hammering in my ears. I had done everything right. I had completed the ritual. I had left the village safe. But the forest, it wasn't finished with me. At dawn, I drove away without looking back. I could feel Astrid's eyes on me as I left, watching from her doorstep, knowing this would be the last time we saw each other. "Be careful, Elias," she had said before I left. "The whispers never forget their own." I gripped the wheel tighter, refusing to let the fear consume me. I told myself I was free, that I had escaped, but I knew the truth. Months later, long after I had settled back into my life, the dreams began. They always started the same. I would be standing at the edge of a dark forest, the air thick with silence. Then I would hear it, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant call of a bird, and then, Elias. The whispers had found me. They would always find me, because I had walked too deep, and no one ever truly leaves the whispering forest. You made it to the end of this terrifying journey, but the whispers never truly stop. The whispering forest may have claimed its victims, but its story lives on. If you enjoyed this horror narration, there's so much more waiting for you. Thank you for watching Forlorn Madness. Your support means everything. It keeps me motivated to create more horror stories, to explore deeper mysteries, and to bring the most chilling tales to life. So if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, like the video, leave a comment, and remember, the whispers never stop. The shadows are always watching, and the darkness is just beginning.